Welcome to Night Radios, where every story is a soft whisper, and every whisper leads you gently into sleep. Let the world fade away just for a while. Tonight, I have a story just for you. Have you ever wondered where a star goes when it falls not in fire, but in silence? What if it didn't disappear, but simply found another way to shine? Before we begin our story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support is the spark that helps us create even more magical stories for you. The night had arrived not with a shout, but with a hush. It slid in slowly, the way a soft blanket might be pulled over a sleepy child. The air held the scent of pine and cooling earth. Somewhere, a fox curled beneath a hollow log, a barn owl blinked into the stillness, and high above, the sky stretched out wide and waiting. It was a velvet sky, deep blue at the edges, almost purple at its heart, and scattered across it were stars, bright ones, proud ones, stars that blinked and shimmered like they knew the world was watching. And then there was one tiny star, tucked quietly near the edge of the sky. It didn't shine like the others did. It trembled just a little, and its light was softer than moon mist. You might miss it if you weren't looking closely. Even the wind seemed unsure whether to wrap around it. Little star, that's what we'll call it. It wasn't that it didn't want to shine. It did. But its light didn't stretch very far. And when the other stars danced and twirled through their constellations, little star stayed still, flickering gently, like a candle at the edge of the world. Up above, the moon passed slowly overhead. She looked older tonight, a bit rounder, with soft lines etched into her light, like a grandmother watching her children from the porch. ... She whispered to the stars as she passed, her voice barely a breath, "Shine as you are." The brighter stars twinkled in reply, but little star stayed quiet. It looked down at the forest below, at the lakes that reflected other lights, at the wind brushing treetops it would never touch. Inside, something stirred, a question. Am I enough to be seen? Little star wondered. Or am I just here? Its light fluttered, like a sigh it wasn't brave enough to let out. Around it, no one answered. The sky, after all, wasn't a place for talking. Not usually. It was a place for shining, for being something, for meaning something. Little star tried to glow a little stronger. It puffed itself up gently, focused hard, but all that came was a flicker, a quiet light. Not wrong, just small. And yet, little star couldn't help but wonder, do I matter at all in this vast sky? It looked toward the familiar points of light, the twins of Gemini laughing in their corner, Orion standing tall, even the North Star holding steady like a compass needle. They all had places, names, stories, but little star, well, it wasn't in any story, not that it knew of. No child had traced it with their finger. No sailor had followed it home. What happens, it asked the night, to a star that no one makes a wish upon? The winds, passing quietly through the sky, paused. They didn't answer, but they carried that question with them, over mountaintops, through the crooked trees, along the rooftops of sleeping towns, until it felt like the whole night was thinking. Too far below, a fox shifted in its sleep. A bell on a porch swung once, then stilled. And high above, little star flickered, not out of fear, but out of longing. It didn't want to be the brightest, or the most important. It just wanted to know that its light reached something, someone, that it wasn't glowing into nothing. The other stars whispered stories to each other, sharing old light like bedtime secrets. But little stars stayed outside the circle, floating gently in the quiet. A kind of loneliness settled in, not heavy, not sad in a hard way, more like the kind of feeling that shows up when you're not sure if you're part of something or just near it. Little Star watched the moon's curve grow smaller as she moved on. The hush of the sky deepened. The trees below didn't move. Even the breeze seemed to slow. And for a while, Little Star stayed still. No questions, no glowing, just being there, unsure if that was enough. But even then, even in the silence, there was something soft beneath the wondering. Not hope exactly, but something nearby, like the first warmth before dawn, like the kind of question that isn't really looking for an answer but for a feeling. And in that moment, something shifted, not big, not loud, just a quiet turn inside. The forest didn't notice. The moon didn't pause. The sky didn't change. But somewhere, Little Star thought, maybe I'll float. Just a little, just to see. Not because it wanted to run away, but because maybe, just maybe, there was more light waiting somewhere else, or someone who might notice. So, as the night held its breath, and the world settled into dreams, Little Star began to drift, only a little, and in the quiet, something in the sky whispered back, not in words, but in a feeling. Even small lights can lead someone home. Little Star didn't hear it exactly, but it felt it. And for now, that was enough to keep glowing, even if only a little longer. The sky had never felt crowded, and yet there were nights when Little Star felt pressed in by it, like a thought caught between louder voices. The brighter stars, with their crisp edges and bold twinkles, seemed to know exactly where they belonged. They lined up in stories that children traced from porches and pillows, names written across centuries. They had places in maps and in songs. They belonged. Little Star, on the other hand, floated quietly near the fringe of the heavens, just above the curve of the earth. Its glow was soft, like the last flicker of a candle that doesn't want to trouble the dark. It watched as constellations danced through familiar patterns, always with purpose, always so sure of themselves. They rarely looked its way, but that didn't sting, at least, not in a sharp way. It was more like an ache that sat behind the ribs, small and slow, ... Maybe I'm not meant to be here, Little Star thought one evening as the sky turned from deep blue to silver grey, the kind of silver that only appears when the world is halfway between night and morning. It wasn't a sad thought, not exactly, more of a wondering, like when a child stares at the corner of a page and asks why the picture ends there. The night air was unusually calm. Even the winds tiptoed through the clouds. The moon, full and mellow, drifted past with her soft light draped like a shawl. She glanced once at Little Star, not in judgment, but with the gaze of someone who remembers what it felt like to feel small. ... That's when it happened, not suddenly, not with fanfare, just a thought, quiet and certain. I want to see what else there is, not to vanish, not to rebel, just to drift, just to feel the shape of the world from a different side. So, Little Star loosened its hold on the thread of sky, and slowly, almost shyly, it began to let go. There was no flash, no grand fall, only a gentle parting, like exhaling a breath you didn't know you were holding. It floated downward through the sky's hush, trailing a faint shimmer, a whisper of light barely brighter than the clouds below. The moon, watching from her slow orbit, blinked once longer than usual, as if trying to hold the image just a moment more. She said nothing, but the crease in her glow deepened, like a memory being made. As Little Star descended, it passed a drifting feather white and light, floating upward on a breeze it couldn't see. They didn't speak, but for a moment they twirled near each other, to soft things crossing mid-flight. Then came a firefly, blinking in and out, its yellow glow pulsing in surprise. A star. It buzzed, more to itself than anyone. But Little Star didn't stop. It was listening to something quieter than questions now. Clouds brushed against its sides like soft arms, wrapping it in cool mist. Their voices, barely above silence, whispered as they moved past. "Where are you going, little light?" And for the first time in a long while, Little Star had an answer. To find out where small things shine best. The clouds didn't laugh or object. They simply parted gently, as if they understood. The sky, now with one less dot in its great wide canvas, didn't complain. It adjusted silently, humming in low tones, as if lulling itself back into balance. The other stars flickered on, tracing their well-worn paths. They might not have noticed the absence, but the sky did. And Little Star, it drifted lower, past the edge of clouds, where the air grew thicker and cooler. Below, the world stretched out in slow colors, deep greens, sleepy grays, rooftops with orange halos from porch lights, rivers that caught the moonlight and carried it downstream like stories passed in whispers. It didn't know exactly what it was looking for, but it felt something new, like hope, but quieter. Not the kind that leaps, the kind that waits. This wasn't falling, it was searching. A slow, curious surrender to something not yet known. And in its wake, the sky remained still, just a little quieter. Just a little softer, as though holding a lullaby in its breath, waiting for the next note to find its way home. Twilight was different down here. Not as wide, not as open, but it had a kind of closeness that the sky didn't. As Little Star drifted lower through the fading blue, she passed chimney tops and weather vanes, the edges of rooftops where cats crouched and shadows curled. The world felt folded in on itself, like a letter halfway opened, waiting to be read. She hovered above a rooftop that rose taller than the others. Not fancy, not grand, just still. The shingles were faded, the corners uneven. But on its highest point sat someone that pulled her closer without a sound. An old man sat beside a crooked tower of clocks. Some ticked softly, some had no hands, and some had stopped altogether, frozen in moments no one remembered anymore. He didn't look up right away. He was winding a delicate timepiece with fingers that moved like falling leaves, slow, with care, and full of memory. His beard curled outward in soft strands of smoke, not like fire smoke, not harsh or sharp. This smoke drifted as if it had forgotten what rush was. It rose and fell in lazy spirals, each wisp bending like a yawn. His eyes, when he finally looked at her, moved slowly, ticked by, tick like they were counting something invisible. Little Star floated just above the chimney ledge, unsure if she was interrupting or expected. He gave a gentle nod, not surprised, not startled, as if he'd been waiting. She found her voice, quiet but steady. "Do you know where stars go when they no longer shine brightly?" He didn't answer right away. His fingers paused over a tiny golden gear. He placed it gently beside a clock face, missing its glass. Then, without turning, he spoke. "They become memories of light, little one. Not lost, just layered in time." She drifted a little closer, curious. "Layered?" she asked. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a round silver object, a pocket watch. But it had no hands, no ticking sound, just a hollow face that held its silence well. "This belongs to the stars," he said. "Your time isn't counted in hours. It's counted in the breaths you light up, however small." Little Star looked down at the watch. It didn't shine, it didn't glow, and yet it felt full, like it had seen things and chosen to keep them quietly. "I'm not sure I've lit up anything," she whispered. The clockmaker turned to her, then, fully. His face was lined like a well-read map, but his expression was kind, not pitying. More like understanding without needing to explain. "You're still moving," he said, tapping the space where her glow pulsed gently. "Still turning, and not all things that turn make noise." He leaned back and looked at the horizon, where the last edge of twilight brushed against the earliest hush of night. "You're measuring something," he said, "even if you don't know what yet." She held that thought carefully, like it might spill if she moved too quickly. She wanted to ask more, but something in her said the questions would still be there tomorrow. Before she could drift away, he reached down and picked up a tiny piece from beside his footer gear, no bigger than a button. It glowed faintly, not with magic, but with something older. He placed it in her palm. "For when you forget," he said. "Not everything has to tick to mean something." She nodded, or tried to. It came out more like a flicker, but he seemed to understand. As she rose from the rooftop, the clocks below didn't chime. They didn't ring, but one of them, just one, gave a soft sigh of a tick, like an old dream settling back into its blanket. She floated higher, not fast, not far, just enough to feel the air change again. The rooftops faded, the tower of clocks grew smaller, and the smoke from the old man's beard drifted after her, twining around her like a lullaby made from the breath between seconds. The world didn't change that night. No stars fell, no sky broke open, but something quiet had moved inside her. Not the answer, not yet, just the space where the answer might grow. The night had worn itself thin by the time Little Star reached the forest. It wasn't dark exactly, just hushed in a way that made everything seem slower, more patient. The trees stood still as if listening to something beneath the soil. A soft breath of pine wove through the branches. Somewhere, a squirrel stirred in its nest, and a distant owl shifted on its perch, but neither made a sound. Little Star hovered just above the treetops, her glow faint but steady. She was tired in a way that didn't ask for rest, just stillness. After the rooftop and the clocks and the soft weight of the gear in her palm, she needed a moment that didn't tick, a moment that simply was. That's when she saw it perched on the tip of a slender birch branch, shivering gently in the breeze. A single golden leaf, veined like old parchment, glowing with the kind of beauty that only comes when something knows its time is nearly over. Little Star drifted closer. The leaf turned ever so slightly and let out a small laugh, raspy but kind. "Well now," the leaf said, "did you come to fall or to fly?" Little Star blinked. She hadn't expected anyone to speak first. She hadn't even known she was looking for company. "I don't know anymore," she said quietly. "I thought I was lost, but maybe I'm just floating." The leaf swayed, not from wind but from thought. Then it nodded. "Floating is a fine place to start," it said. "Better than clinging too long." Little Star tilted her light toward the leaf. "Aren't you afraid to fall?" The leaf smiled, a warm curl at its edges. "Falling isn't always failing. I've waited all season just for this drop." Its voice was full of something Little Star couldn't name, something between peace and anticipation. "I've soaked in sun," the leaf continued. "I've danced with rain. I've heard birds sing secrets and squirrels argue over nothing. I've even watched the moon rise through the branches like a silver balloon caught in sleep." There was a pause. The breeze whispered through the needles above. "And now," the leaf said, "it's time. But where will you go?" Little Star asked. "Down," the leaf said simply. "Then who knows? Maybe into soil, maybe into memory, maybe just into the hush of things." It chuckled again and added, "And besides, even leaves get standing ovations. Just listen to the crunch when we land." Little Star smiled, something soft unfolding in her. The wind passed through once more, gentle but sure. The leaf didn't resist. It let go. There was no drama, no sharp drop, just a spiral, a slow, thoughtful spin through the cool morning air. It turned once, then again, catching light on its back like a final bow. And below, the forest didn't make a sound, but in its stillness, it seemed to lean in, as if every root and stone and slumbering bird was watching. Little Star followed the path of the leaf's descent, not with sorrow but with awe. It wasn't falling, it was completing something, and that felt different. She drifted a little lower, holding the moment gently inside her. Not like something fragile, but like something sacred. There had been no fear in the leaf, no clinging, only the quiet kind of courage that comes from knowing you've done all you came to do. And now it's okay to let the next part begin. Little Star didn't speak as she floated away. She didn't need to, but inside her, something shifted. A space opened up where hesitation had been. Not certainty, not yet, but an understanding. That maybe falling wasn't the end. Maybe it was part of the rhythm. She kept that image closer, golden spiral in the morning breeze, a voice that laughed without regret, a fall that felt like flying, and somewhere in the forest, the wind curled around tree trunks and over mossy stones, carrying with it a whisper only the stillest ears could hear. Letting go, it seemed to say, isn't the same as giving up. It's just the next part of the story. Morning didn't come all at once. It slid in softly, as if it didn't want to wake anything too fast. The light was shy, tucked behind thick grey clouds that folded over the meadow like a quilt, still clinging to the edges of a dream. Everything was still except for the air. It hummed, low and quiet, like a lullaby without words. Little Star drifted lower, her glow dimmed by the soft drizzle that had begun to fall. She didn't mind. There was something comforting about the rain. It didn't rush, it didn't press. It just fell, gently and without demand, touching everything without needing to change. Below her, a wide green leaf trembled slightly under the weight of a single raindrop. The drop clung to the very tip, round and whole, its surface shining like a bubble holding the sky. When Little Star floated close, The raindrop shimmered, tilting just enough to notice. "You're not from here," the raindrop said, its voice clear and musical, like glass touched by wind. "Are you a piece of sky?" Little Star hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because she wasn't sure what she wanted the answer to be. Still, she answered gently, "I suppose I am. I used to be." The raindrop pulsed with interest. It didn't ask more, not yet, just listened with its whole being, still and open, like it had time for whatever came next. Little Star settled on the leaf's edge, careful not to disturb the drop's balance. The leaf held them both, bending slightly beneath their weightless presence. Around them, rain whispered against petals and soil, 1,000 tiny touches, too soft to see. "I've been floating for a while now," Little Star said. "Not falling, really, just moving, looking for where I'm meant to shine, or if I'm meant to shine at all." The raindrop didn't reply right away. It watched a smaller droplet roll down the stem below, leaving a dark green trail. "Most stars don't end up here," it said after a moment. "But then again, most rain doesn't speak." They both smiled. "Do you miss the sky?" the raindrop asked. Little Star looked up through the misty canopy of cloud. It felt farther away than before. Not unreachable, but distant in a way that made her chest feel both light and heavy. "I miss being sure," she said, "but I don't miss feeling invisible." The raindrop shimmered brighter, then asked, "Have you ever seen yourself?" Little Star blinked. "Not really," she said. "Not beyond what I feel." The raindrop leaned forward, just a bit. "Then look." She leaned closer. In its surface, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not brilliance, not power, but clarity. Her light was small, yes, but it held steady. It didn't pulse like the bigger stars. It didn't dance with confidence, but it glowed in a way that felt deliberate, present, real. "I never knew I looked like that," she whispered. The raindrop's voice softened like a hush wrapped in light. "You think you are lost, but some things are only found by being seen through others." Little Star didn't speak. She just held the moment. Then, as if by quiet design, the raindrop loosened its grip. It didn't shiver or hesitate. It simply let go. It fell, not fast, but clean its body, catching a sliver of light as it dropped from the leaf's tip, spiraling through air made of breath and mist. It landed in the soil below with the softest sound, like the closing of a book someone had finished reading slowly. Little Star watched, a warmth spreading gently through her center. It wasn't fire, it wasn't clarity, but it was something like being known. "Thank you," she whispered to the space it left behind. "Thank you for showing me me." The leaf, now lighter, swayed with the wind, and Little Star rose slowly, not to leave, but to carry something with her, her truth she hadn't seen, reflected not in herself, but in the stillness of another. Rain continued to fall, stitching quiet rhythms into the grass, and somewhere beneath the surface, where roots drink stories and soil remembers everything, the raindrop began its next becoming. Above it all, Little Star glowed, not louder, not brighter, but clearer, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen, even in her quiet, even in her smallness, even in the rain. The sky had grown tired. It wasn't loud or angry the way storms sometimes are. It didn't rage or crack or howl. It simply thickened like a blanket, pulled too far over the head, a dream drifting past its edges. Grey settled into every corner. Not dark, not light, just unsure. Little Star floated higher, thinking the fog might thin if she rose above it. But the clouds didn't break. They just kept coming, soft and shapeless, swallowing sky after sky until there was nothing left to see. No edge, no center, no place to begin again. The wind, once a gentle song, had quieted completely. It didn't push or guide or dance. It simply waited. And in that stillness, Little Star felt something unfamiliar curl inside her. She tried to glow. It wasn't much to ask. Just a little pulse, a soft shimmer, something to remind herself that she was still there, but nothing came. Her light flickered once, then fell quiet. She blinked, waiting for the next beat of brightness. It didn't arrive. For the first time, she felt it, not the ache of being small or the question of being enough, but the absence of herself, not just unseen, unbeing. No moon drifted by with comforting glances. No golden leaf swirled below. No raindrop shimmered at her side. The clockmaker's quiet ticking was long behind her now. There was only the fog, and in that soft, endless hush, even the sky seemed to forget her name. She drifted not with wonder, not with purpose, just drifted. The clouds wrapped around her like wool, thick and slow. If she reached out, her hand wouldn't know where it ended. If she tried to speak, the sound would dissolve before it met the air. Time lost shape, so did direction. She didn't know how long she floated in that forgetful place. It could have been seconds. It could have been hours. It didn't matter. Nothing did. "Maybe I'm not a star anymore," she whispered. The words were meant for herself, but they disappeared before they reached her ears. Maybe I was never meant to be. And that thought, soft but heavy, sat in her chest like a stone smoothed by water. If she'd had tears, they would have fallen. But stars don't cry. They dim, they fade, they wait to be remembered. Below her, the world was hidden in mist. Trees became shadows, fields became smoke. Even the rivers forgot how to shine. But somewhere far beneath that curtain of cloud, a child stood in a backyard, wrapped in a blanket, bare feet pressing into damp grass. The fog was thick and the stars were missing, but still the child looked up. A small voice broke the hush. "I saw something," it said, barely more than breath. "I think a star just passed by." The words rose slowly, winding their way through the stillness. They reached nothing solid, no ear, no answer, but they reached her. A tiny flicker sparked in her chest, not bright, not bold, but real. Not because the child had seen her clearly, but because the child had believed she was there. And that belief lit something inside her that wasn't fire, but wasn't fog either. She didn't glow right away, not fully, but she felt the warmth again, like a small match struck in a quiet room, like the memory of being held. It was enough, not to shine, but to stay, and maybe, just maybe, to begin again. Not as the brightest, not as the biggest, but as the one still floating, still hoping, still becoming. The fog hadn't lifted. It had simply grown quieter, like a blanket that had stopped trying to keep you warm and had settled instead into simply being there. Little Star drifted through it without hurry, her light still soft and unsure, not quite gone but not quite steady either. The sky had no shape now, No edges, no center, only the hush of grey that clung to her like breath held too long. That's when she heard it. Not a voice, not words, a sound small, scratchy, off-key, a tune barely holding together, like someone humming to themselves while sweeping an empty room. Not to be heard, just to remember how it felt. She floated toward it, curious more than hopeful. The sound wove between rooftops and chimneys, curling through the fog like a ribbon with no clear beginning. There, at the very top of a leaning chimney, sat a cat, black as the smoke-stained bricks, with whiskers that twitched like antennae reaching for dreams. His tail flicked with rhythm, and his eyes were shut as he sang. His song wasn't good, not by any measure. The notes stumbled, the pitch wavered, but something in it felt honest, like a memory that didn't need to be perfect to matter. Little Star hovered nearby, waiting until a pause opened in the melody. "Why do you sing if no one listens?" she asked. The cat cracked one eye open and grinned. His teeth were crooked and a little yellow, like old piano keys, but the smile was warm. "Because silence gets lonely too," he said, "and some songs are for remembering, not performing." He stretched, long and lazy, then sat upright again and looked out toward where the moon should have been. She used to sit up there, just over that hill, every night, like clockwork. I'd sing, she'd shine. It was our arrangement. Then the fog came, and she stopped showing up. Little Star glanced upward, half expecting a response, but the sky was quiet. "Do you think she stopped listening?" she asked. The cat shrugged, his shoulders rising slow like dawn. "Maybe, or maybe she just listens better when you whisper." He turned back to her, tail curling round his paws. "You don't have to shine all the time, you know. Sometimes it's enough to be near the music." She floated a little closer, letting the warmth of his presence settle over her like a shared blanket. Her glow didn't return in full, but it stirred faint, like embers remembering what it meant to burn. The cat sang again, softer this time, a lullaby with no real words, just shapes of sound that wrapped around them both. It wasn't meant to impress, it wasn't meant to heal. It was meant to be shared. She rested beside him, not on the chimney but close enough to feel the soot and the song. The fog thickened, but it didn't feel so heavy now. Not with melody to drift on. "You've been floating a while," the cat said, not as a question. "I thought I was searching," she said, "but maybe I've just been moving." The cat purred low in his throat, then yawned wide enough to show every tooth. "That's all right. Some things don't need a destination. They just need a rhythm." Little Star let herself settle, the silence now full of song, even if no one else could hear it. The cat curled tighter, his breathing slow and steady, and the chimney, crooked though it was, held them both. Outside the song, the world continued its hush. The moon didn't show, the fog didn't part, but in that small space between soot and sky, something shimmered, not loud, not lasting, but true. A glow that didn't need to lead, only to linger. And maybe that was enough for now. That night, Little Star didn't drift through sky or fog or wind. She slipped instead into something quieter a place, softer than clouds and slower than time. It wasn't falling, it wasn't floating, it was something in between, like sinking into sleep without knowing when the dream began. She found herself surrounded not by darkness, but by snow, not cold, not biting, just still. The kind of snow that seemed to hush the world gently, reminding even the wind to whisper. It didn't fall, it simply existed, blanketing everything in a calm so deep it felt like the earth itself was pausing to exhale. In the center of that white silence stood a tree, tall and bare, its branches stretched like open arms. There were no leaves, no birds, no color at all, except the faint blue tint of memory caught in the bark. And yet, it didn't feel empty. It stood the way some people speak, not loudly, but with certainty. Little Star hovered near it, her glow barely warming the space around her. The tree didn't move, but she heard it clearly. Its voice wasn't spoken, it was felt. It came through the creak of wood, the gentle crack of frozen bark, the quiet sigh of roots buried deep. "I am not empty," it said. "I am ready." The words didn't echo, they settled. Little Star drifted closer, drawn not by light or need, but by the comfort of something honest. ... She circled the tree slowly, her glow catching in the delicate frost laced along each branch. The frost sparkled briefly, like tiny stars paused in mid-thought. A memory stirred inherent and sweet, like a song half-remembered. Long ago, in seasons forgotten by most, stars would sometimes visit winter trees. They would land gently, just for a night, their light resting among the branches like tiny ornaments, not to shine for all the world, just to be part of someone's evening. A small voice, familiar and still, reached her from the bark. "Would you like to rest here?" She hesitated, not from fear, but from something else, something like awe. Then she settled among the limbs, her small light tucking into the crook of a branch as if it had always belonged there. Below, the world was hushed. Snow sat quietly on rooftops, trees stood like guardians, and in one small house, tucked beneath the edge of the hill, a child pressed their nose to the window, eyes wide, breath fogging the glass. "Look," the child whispered, pointing upward. "A star on the tree." The words rose through the cold air like a ribbon, curling round the branches and curling through Little Star's glow. She didn't brighten, she didn't shine loudly, but something deep within her settled. She was not lost in the sky. She was not alone in the fog. She was not drifting with no direction. She was here, not as a star to guide, but as a moment to hold. The winter tree creaked softly beneath her, and in the slow rhythm of wind through its limbs, she heard it speak again. "Sometimes we shine the brightest," it said, "when we become someone's memory." And in that stillness, Little Star understood something she hadn't before. It wasn't about how far her light reached, or how many eyes saw her. It was about where she chose to stay, even if just for a while. It was about being part of something smaller, something intimate, something real. She nestled deeper into the branches, feeling their strength, their patience. The world below remained still. The snow held its breath, and inside that quiet, something warm bloomed behind her. Glow not bold, not loud, but lasting. She didn't dream of flying that night. She didn't long for the sky. She simply rested, embraced not by space, but by belonging. The morning hadn't fully arrived, but it was close enough to be felt, not seen, just sensed. The kind of closeness that settles in your bones before you open your eyes. The air held that quiet in-between where time breathes slower, where nothing needs to be done just yet. Little star rested among the arms of the winter tree, still tucked into the same crook of branch where she had curled the night before. Her glow was faint, not from doubt this time, but from rest. Not dim, not gone, just softer, like a candle that chooses quiet over brightness. She wasn't alone. Without warning, a snowflake landed beside her. It twirled down from the sky like it had taken a long, deliberate journey, spinning in the air with the grace of something that had no weight except wonder. It settled gently on the branch just inches from her, its edges sharp and intricate, but melting even as it arrived. "You look like you're dancing," Little Star whispered. The snowflake shimmered with a laugh, if laughter could be made of light and hush. "That's all I can do before I disappear," it said, voice as clear and fleeting as frost on a window pane. They sat together in the hush, two small things held by a tree that had seen more winters than they could imagine. "You don't mind?" Little Star asked. "That you melt so quickly?" The snowflake tilted slightly, as if surprised by the question. "Why would I? I get to fall, to spin, to kiss the earth and then melt into something else. But you vanish. I change," the snowflake said simply. "That's different." Little Star watched the snowflake begin to lose its shape, tiny points softening, lines fading. It wasn't sad, it was serene, not like a goodbye, but like a note finishing the song it was always meant to sing. She thought of the raindrop, of the leaf, of the song the cat sang to no one but silence. She thought of how none of them stayed, but none of them really left either. "I guess even the smallest moments can be complete," she said softly. The snowflake nodded, or maybe it melted into the nod. "They can," it said, its voice quieter now, "especially when someone is there to notice them." Little Star's glow flickered gently. Not a flare, not a performance, just an answer, a response to the truth unfolding beside her. She looked inward, not to see herself, but to feel what remained, not the shine, not the drifting, but the memory of where she had been and who had been there with her. The clockmaker's gear still rested inside her light, tucked away like a forgotten verse. The cat's melody hummed softly in the silence. The raindrops' reflection still echoed, showing her the shape of her own existence. She began to understand something she had only sensed before, that her purpose wasn't in being bright enough for everyone to see. It was in being there, fully, even if only briefly. It was in becoming part of other people's stillness, part of their noticing, part of the soft spaces where meaning grows. Her glow didn't surge, it didn't burst, but it settled, like a lighthouse that knows it won't save every ship, but shines anyway, just in case someone's looking. "I don't think I need to shine for anyone anymore," she said quietly, more to herself than the snowflake. "No," the snowflake agreed, its edges now barely holding shape. "You just shine with them." And with that, it slipped into the breeze, still spinning, still graceful, but no longer here. Little Star didn't follow. She stayed, not out of fear or indecision, but out of something new, belonging. She looked down at the snow-covered village, the rooftops still sleeping beneath cottony clouds, and she let her light spread not far, not wide, but steady. The winter tree creaked gently, as if it approved. And for the first time, Little Star felt no pull to rise or fall. She simply existed, part of the morning, part of the quiet, part of the WALTZ. Evening tiptoed in, not with shadows, but with a hush that made the world lean in and listen. The snow had stopped falling, and the clouds, once thick with thought, had wandered off to rest somewhere else. Below, rooftops softened under layers of white, and the windows of houses flickered with slow, steady gold. Little Star floated gently over a quiet village, her glow no longer lost or searching. It had become something steadier, not loud, but true. She wasn't looking for answers anymore. She was listening for invitations, and that's when she felt it. Not a pull, not a call, more like a memory she hadn't lived yet, tucked in the corner of a breath. She drifted downward, over chimneys and snowy porches, until she came to a small attic window. The glass was old, dusted with frost and time, but through it she saw a glimmer, a soft glow, barely there, like someone had left a sigh behind and it forgot to fade. She slipped through the crack where the window didn't quite close. The attic greeted her with silence not empty, but full of resting things. There were boxes of old books, a rocking horse with one ear missing, a row of stuffed animals slumped against one another like they were waiting for one last bedtime story. In the center of the room stood a wooden chest. Its hinges creaked, not with warning, but with memory. And inside, resting among yellowed letters and marbles gone dull with dust, was a lantern. It wasn't lit. It hadn't been for a long time, maybe never. But it held the shape of something that remembered what light felt like. Little Star hovered over it, curious. She didn't mean to settle inside. She just did. And the moment she curled into the hollow of the lantern, something changed. Not with a spark, not with a flame, but with presence. The lantern didn't ignite. It breathed. A golden glow bloomed from its center, warm as a lullaby and just as slow. It wrapped around the attic like a story being told from one object to another. A forgotten teddy bear opened one button eye. A paper bird hanging by a thread from the ceiling gave the softest flutter of wings. And across the room, the rocking horse rocked once, then settlet. Through the window, a child stirred beneath their blanket. One sleepy eye opened, unfocused at first, then fixed on the golden light, now spilling gently across their ceiling. The child whispered, so soft it could have been part of a dream, "Thank you, Little Star." Little Star didn't shine brighter. She didn't rise. She just rested. In that glow, something clicked into place inside her. Not loud, not sudden, just S-U-R-E. "I am not lost," she whispered to the quiet things around her. "I am found wherever someone needs light." And her glow pulsed, not with hope, with belief. She didn't need the sky to name her. She didn't need to be part of a pattern or a map. She was part of a moment, part of someone's comfort. That was enough. Outside, the village curled deeper into its evening hush. The world didn't change. No trumpets of stars, no grand shift in wind. Just warmth, quiet and steady, held inside a lantern that had waited a long time to be remembered. As the attic faded behind her closed eyes, Little Star felt herself dissolve not into nothing, but into everything that mattered. And the lantern stayed behind, not bright, but warm, waiting for another star who might come through the window one day, looking not to shine, but to rest. The sky opened slowly, as if it, too, had just woken from a long and gentle dream. Clouds stretched and yawned, drifting apart like sleepy thoughts, finding their way back to the edges of morning. The moon rounder now, softer somehow, glided into view with a face full of time. She moved without hurry, carrying with her the silence of stories, almost told. She paused over the space where little star once shimmered. It was quiet there, but not empty. The moon smiled not because she saw a little star, but because she didn't need to. All around her, something had changed. There was no trace of absence, no hollow where brightness used to be. The sky didn't miss her, it remembered her, and that was different. Below, the world held the memory gently. In a pine tree standing tall beside a frozen pond, one bare branch caught a soft flicker. It wasn't ice, it wasn't frost. It was something else, something warmer than winter and quieter than flame. In the attic window of a house, tucked near the edge of the woods, a lantern glowed still and gold, its light curling into the corners where old toys slept. A child, half asleep and dreaming in the crook of a blanket, whispered to no one in particular, "She's still here." And somewhere, in a field where the snow had begun to melt, a stream caught the light from a grey morning sky. A ripple danced across its surface, and in that movement, the warmth of a memory travelled with the current. She had not returned to the sky. She didn't need to. She was already there, threaded into everything that had held her, loved her, listened to her. The clockmaker, alone on his rooftop with time ticking like a lullaby, lifted his head. He didn't say a word, but his hands, steady and soft, moved with a bit more ease, as if a gear he hadn't noticed was missing had quietly fallen back into place. Down in the earth, where melted snow whispered into roots, the raindrop, no longer a drop but part of a stream, reflected a glimmer that wasn't sun and wasn't sky. Just a warmth remembered from a branch, from a question, from a meeting not meant to last, ... And the cat, still perched on his favorite chimney despite the wind's chill, hummed a new tune. This one didn't chase the moon or echo off rooftops. It was for himself, and maybe for the silence, and maybe for someone he couldn't see but still felt curled beside him in soot and shadow. Little Star had become part of memory, music, water, fire, and hush. Not faded, not lost, just dispersed, like a story that doesn't end, but instead finds its way into lullabies and campfires and attic lanterns. She hadn't given herself away. She had expanded. She had stopped needing to shine alone, because now she shimmered quietly in places where being seen wasn't the point being felt. And high above, the moon rocked gently in her cradle of clouds. Her voice, slow as dusk and soft as breath, travelled low across the sky. You found your home not in the stars, but in the hearts you touched, and the sky, hearing her, didn't speak. It just held the silence a little closer, as if tucking something precious into the folds of its robe, to keep 4 nights still to see OME. The story has grown quiet now, not because it has ended, but because it has curled in close, like a book resting softly on your chest after the final page, still warm with its last word. The journey we followed through sky and fog, song and silence, has folded gently into stillness. But there's still a voice, a small one, a voice that doesn't rush or rise, but reaches you as if it already knew where you were. It doesn't speak to Little Star anymore. It speaks to you. Maybe you're lying in a bed, tucked under a blanket that smells like home. Maybe the room is dark, or maybe there's a soft glow from the hallway, or the hum of a nightlight that has stood guard longer than you remember. Maybe your body is still, but your thoughts are wandering slowly, quietly, without need to arrive anywhere. That voice drifts unfamiliar and calm, like something that has always been just outside the edge of your dreams. You, too, are a little star. It says it not as a compliment, not as a wish, but as a truth already known. Some days you shine bright, you stretch wide across your own sky, and people point at you and say, "Look." And some days you drift, quietly, softly, wondering if anyone even notices. There's no judgment in those words, just understanding, the kind that doesn't need to be explained. But always, the voice continues, you are seen. There's a pause, not empty, but patient, like the space between heartbeats when the world is holding its breath. Even when you feel lost, the world is full of tiny windows looking up. Some of them belong to children. Some belong to people who have forgotten how to wish. But they're looking, waiting to catch your glow. You might not see it. You might not always feel it. But even the quietest light has a place. The voice doesn't need to prove anything. It simply knows. Then the words grow slower, softer. They begin to float, not like thoughts, but like feathers, drifting downward, ready to settle wherever you need them. And if ever you forget who you are, just close your eyes. Let go of the weight of being bright. Let go of trying to be found, and listen to the wind. It hushes for a moment, as if letting you imagine what that wind might sound like, moving through trees, brushing past your curtains, or stirring in the quiet corners of your heart. And you'll hear a little star singing, somewhere inside you. Not loudly, not with words, just a hum, just ENOUGH. The voice pauses again, not because it's done, but because this is the part it doesn't want you to miss. Its final words are not spoken, they're sung, a lullaby, soft and slow, like rocking in a hammock of sky. Sleep now, little star, for even the skies need to dream. And somewhere above, you may be in the attic of the night, maybe in the quiet between thoughts a lantern still glows, not to lead, but to keep you company as you drift into your own soft, endless SKY. And maybe that's the quiet magic of Little Star's journey, that you don't have to shine the loudest to matter. Sometimes it's the softest lights that stay with us the longest, not in the sky, but in the corners of memory, music, and warmth. What about you? Have you ever felt like you were drifting, only to discover you were exactly where someone needed you to be? Let us know in the comments, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And if tonight's story brought you comfort or sparked something gentle inside you, don't forget to subscribe to Night Radios for more stories that whisper, wander, and warm your heart. Until next time, keep glowing in your own quiet way.